to talk with us today. Yeah, as I said, it's a big challenge, and you can go from the highs of thinking, when we read certain people on LinkedIn and certain articles, and we're all doing fantastically well, to get quite despondent about it. I mean, how do you guys stay positive against this fluctuating news, and depending on who you're connected to and listening to?
Blimey, that's a question. I mean, my version is probably the same as when I had twins. I don't think too much about it. You just got to get on with the day to day and hope there's a decent outcome at the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah. What more could you do? I
could relate to that. I mean, Russell, I've been at this for 10 years this week, or last week. I lose track, which is exactly the same time I gave up fags, which is, I think,
Russell's two stressful things at once.
I know. Russell was even then, I don't know how many years into it, probably already 5 years or so into it, so been at it even longer than I am. I think I would. I think this is quite a positive phase, albeit not without any frustrations relative to the depths that we plumbed last decade. We're moving. There's some good stuff happening. I don't know if you see the same, Ross.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's certainly things. It would be lovely for it to have happened sooner. Certainly, there's a lot of money being pushed out to make things happen. That's for sure. We'll probably come on to a discussion later on whether they're the right things or not. But at least there is some positivity. I would agree with that, David. I would agree with that. Yeah, it's been 20 years now for me, and since I first started doing my house up in Sutton in South London, staring at the floor, thinking surely not everybody's got to do this. But yeah, we do. We're getting there. I think that is. We could talk about the nuts and bolts of that, I'm sure, over the next hour.
Yeah. And actually, sorry, by asking that question right at the start, I did sort of jump straight into it and didn't really give you the opportunity both to introduce yourselves and talk a bit about, well, you've just covered your how long you've been in the game, as it were, but just would you like to talk about the organizations that you head up and the work you're doing, and just give us a feel for that work just briefly? I mean, I'm sure the guys on the calls are familiar with you, but it'd be good just to give a little bit of an introduction before, Russell, you're going to sort of frame the marketplace from just look at it from a high level macro perspective initially, and then go on from there, shouldn't we?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. So hi everybody, I'm Russell. I started off with Parity Projects. It was 2005 that company was formed, but it was on the back of renovating my own home. I got my 3-bed Victorian semi-detached house down to 50 quid a year of heating bills. And I'm a civil engineer, really. I shouldn't be doing this at all, but it was on the basis that nobody could really give me an advice to do that I felt that the service needed to come forward and do that. And I had about 3,000 people come and look at my house over those few years of doing the work. I did the sort of the pathetic exercise of giving leaflets out of the station just to see if anybody cared. And a few people came. It went from there, really. So Parity's tried to offer impartial advice to people that are making tricky decisions. And it's moved to now, whilst it was a sort of a project management and advice firm, it's now moved to become a software platform predominantly. So we advise a third of all the local authorities in the UK now on retrofit and their strategies and how to get net zero. We've got 2 million social homes on the platform, so we help a lot of landlords to make decisions. And we've got tools that enable individual retrofits to be guided and put strategy reports in place, so that this is sort of pre-designed, so you know what things to incorporate in a retrofit to get it to net zero or to SAP-C or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. But I guess 10 years ago, we got to the point where we realised that actually we needed a model for accelerating the workforce. And I work with a bunch of trade associations to create RetrofitWorks, which is a not-for-profit cooperative. So it's owned by practitioners. So in that subset will be contractors, designers, retrofit assessors, retrofit coordinators, people that want to do the work and want to make some money within the marketplace. they own it and they sit on the board and they direct how that works. But effectively, it brings them a model that enables us to do two things. One is to go out and win contracts. So flagship contract at the moment, or two flavors of those really, I guess. One is we've got a grant-based focus. So we work for the Mayor of London on the Warmer Homes programme. That's the £32 million retrofit programme for homeowners that own their own property but are on low income. So it provides them with an opportunity to reduce their bills. Otherwise, they just wouldn't be able to do it. There's a lot of very vulnerable customers. About 70% of the customers on that are low income. But the other side of it as well, we stick our neck out and we design and run programs for people that are willing to pay for their own retrofits. And the key one at the moment, if you want to look up Cozy Homes at Oxfordshire, it's for homeowners that want to renovate their home, but it brings up the supply chain to them in a coordinated fashion. Mm-hmm. And it's the first time anyone's ever created a retrofit program for the willing to pay that pays for itself. So the scheme pays for itself, doesn't need any external funding anymore. And it is driving the local market there, but it's owned by the local market too. So it's really quite a nice model, but it needs a huge amount of oomph to get it going. And people like David to help create the supply chain to make that work. You know, it can't be done in isolation. It's really tricky. But in order to make that happen as well, my final hat, I guess, is I helped with others create something called the National Retrofit Hub, which was launched at the start of March. We've got a bit of sponsorship money from Innovate UK, and some other not-for-profit partners are putting their hand in the pocket as well, thankfully, to help that happen, and providing sort of an interface between industry and government, really, to try and plug some of the gaps in activity and knowledge and research to try and get rid of the final barriers to try and get this mass market moving, which we need to do. And the big problem on the market from that sense, just to raise some of the big numbers, if you like, on that side of it, we've got a challenge. Clearly, we've got every building in the UK needs to have some decarbonisation before to hit our. I mean, 2050 is laughable, really, in terms of a long-term target, because we had the headline today from the IPCC that we're very likely to see 1.5 degrees of warming in the world by 2027, which was the Paris Agreement's target to limit. So we're not going to get that, that's for sure. 2 degrees is an aim, but I still believe there's only an 80% chance of reaching that. So the big numbers are that the National Retrofit Strategy work I did in 2021 highlighted that we've got a £540 billion capital programme. So your headline today was 100 billion. My view is it's 540, which is in the same territory actually as HS2. So we've got to decide what our priorities are.
We're good at that.
But the big one really, and this is where David and I have been working on, is really the supply chain. My view is we need about another 500,000 tradespeople just to plug the gap. And that's if we start up that national retrofit program, if it started this year, that's how many people we need to do the work every year to when we've completed. And the longer we leave the commencement of that program, the more people we're going to need, because we've got a hard deadline. And that, by the way, that deadline is 2040. I think that deadline needs to be way sooner. So we're talking about big, scary numbers, all of which seem impossible to reach, frankly, if you look at it in that sense, which is why I go back to my analogy of trying not to think too hard about it. Just get your head down and do the best you can. Mm-hmm. And government are starting to do the right sorts of things now, I think. Anyway, I'll leave it there and let David do.
We'll go on from there. Yeah, David, I mean, you often are in number 10. Is that fair to say? Or you're
no, God, no.
Definitely in touch with the government. What's
well, I've been to number 10 exactly as many times as Russell, I think, which is once.
Right. At the same time, yeah.
And we've never heard from him since, unless you know any better, Russ. But
no.
No, I mean, both of us do have a lot to do with government. That's for sure. But I'll come on to that, if I may.
Yeah.
Sort of a little bit of a backstory to me and the academy, as Russ has just done. So go and say it's 10 years since I've been exclusively focused on retrofit skills in my career, and it takes over your life. Prior to that, I was a bit of a rebel without a cause, really. I was an exhibition and conference organizer that had, for the preceding 7 or 8 years, worked in and around sustainability and construction, and became really passionate about that. And towards in fact, I think the last show I ever organised was the first national retrofit show, which was something of a flop, as were all the policies that were supposed to underpin it at the time. But sort of that was I mean, it was in meeting people like Russell and Peter Rickaby and Bob Pruitt and many of us, some of the designy names that some of you may know, Mark Elton, that you became really inspired by the passion and the knowledge that they had, and the sheer need for people to pick up the baton and do something about this, because 27 million homes, oldest and coldest housing stock in the world, fuel poverty figures which are, you know, an absolute, frankly, a disgrace in the modern world, and only getting worse and not better. It's something that you need to do something about. So I stopped being a rebel without a cause and started being a rebel with one. Still a rebel, I hope. I was also involved in the world of skills at that time. Again, sort of on boards of various sort of government initiatives or quangos, and I always found it a completely bewildering space, just full of people who use words that no one understands, and seem really good at reorganizing their organizations, really bad at actually making any training happen at any sort of scale. I mean, you know, I'm really just offended at 1,000 people in saying that, but that was my experience of it, and I'm not patient enough to do that. So I took a job running a place in Stoke-on-Trent, which was called POR, the Centre of Refurbishment Excellence, which was another, I think, that's the best way of describing that 2.5 years. That's when I gave up smoking. How did I do that? Anyway, it was it was an EU funded project, and like so many of those, it did some really good things, and then it ran out of money. And we set up the Retrofit Academy at the beginning of 2016. After that, effectively it closed. That program had closed. And we had started through CORE to bring together this body of expertise and these one course, which was our focus back then, which was our Retrofit Coordinator course. It's the course that was initially thinking was it would be the course that would bring architects and architectural technologists and other building professionals, bring professionals back into the world of retrofit, because government policy up till then had been sort of incentivizing everything to through managing the profit margins to get out of the process anyone who absolutely knew what they were doing. And we wanted to give that a legacy, which we did, and turn it into a nationally recognised qualification. And then in 2019, something called IPAS 2035 was published. It's the British standard for retrofit, which had been produced, actually working with the likes of Russell and Peter Rickaby and others that knew what they were talking about, off the back of a whole range of scandals in the industry. The government-sponsored reports which highlighted that what we were delivering to homeowners, what we were calling retrofit, wasn't anything of the sort, was a disgrace. So sort of the time for retrofit coordinators and people who knew what they're doing had come. And that really, after several years of struggling along with it, has really sort of catalyzed a lot of progress in terms of upskilling. Lots of retrofit coordinators, and off the back of that, you know, trained retrofit assessors and retrofit advisors. We're now able to focus on other areas, one of which would be of interest to people on the call, because we're developing a retrofit designer qualification now. With hindsight, I wish we'd been able to do that about 2-3 years ago, because there's a varied here and now skills gap around that, but we can only do so much in a certain order with certain capacity, but we're getting stuck into that now. Just to finish off, to talk about the size of this skills gap of the workforce project that Russell you did. I give you, I agree with, I mean, we often quote Russell's numbers, New Economics Foundation's numbers. We agree with that, the size of that skills gap. Just to put it into some context, there sort of is a bit of a national retrofit program at the minute, or at least the government thinks it is. It's through something called the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund and the Home Upgrade Grant, so government grant schemes in particular sectors. They're the first large-scale funded programs that require compliance with the PAS and for it to be done broadly properly. and the policy objectives over the next 2 years won't be delivered, in our view, for exactly that reason. So we've been, there's no such thing as labour market statistics, and we don't know how many external wall insulation people there are. At least I've not been able to find that. But people seem to think we've got about 10% of what's needed to deliver just those policy initiatives. So we can forget large-scale decarbonisation being delivered. They can announce numbers, headline numbers, but actually delivering it, getting it done, until we've cracked that skills gap, we won't get very far.
Which is why you don't want to dwell on it too much. You just got to crack on and do what you can do. I mean, from the people coming into your organization, can you come in? Do you need a level of experience, or you training people from the start, or people converting from similar roles? I mean, that's all. You couldn't have helped either.
Excuse me, I have a bit of frog in my throat. The PAS 2035 determines who needs what, and who can do what. The role of a retrofit designer, the requirement is that you're a qualified architect or architectural technologist or chartered surveyor or construction manager in order to practice as a retrofit designer. It doesn't require you to do any additional training at all.
Right.
What we do find is that there's an awful lot of architects out there who haven't done much retrofit, so we should reflect a bit on what that means, what retrofit is and isn't.
Yeah.
Who need a sort of intensive course of intensive learning intervention around it specifically, but
because I mean, it's interesting. We've had there are architects on the call, and they're obviously working within practices that have a sustainability arm. It's amazing how many of them don't, and they're the people we really should be speaking to now, not the ones who are already doing it. But that's you have your challenge. Everyone has their challenge, and for us as well, we're just trying to get those people working for those practices that aren't even considering retrofit, undertaking retrofit work at this moment in time. Russell, is this sort of, in terms of going back and looking at sort of the bigger picture, I mean, how easy is it to answer? I mean, what would you like to see the government do to improve the rollout of home retrofit in the UK? Is that a fair question?
If it's doing something that is so complex and requires so much time to do well, and you really want to only do it once, you don't want to be unpicking things that you haven't thought through properly, which unfortunately we're going to have to do every day, because builders installing kitchens right now without insulation underneath it or behind it, that's baking in carbon for the future. It's that every day that happens we're making the situation worse. It's we need that plan. That plan needs to include incentives for householders to want to do it. It's got to include regulation for whether it's building regulation or other kind of regulations which would enable us to make good decisions, to raise the minimum up, make us incentives for us to aspire to go beyond, but actually to raise the bottom up will be a good thing too. I think this government will obviously be completely allergic to any kind of regulation on that sense, but just having basic incentives for people to do a little bit more will encourage them to do so. And it even goes back to the very simple calculation that some people do in terms of economic payback of the investment of what they'll do with their property, right? Everyone still asks this question, even though they're about to spend 65k on a kitchen. But if I'm going to spend this amount on insulation, how much do I save per year? When will it pay back? But actually, we're starting to see now quite a few estate agents that I speak to, at a corporate level, not the branches, but they're saying that there is evidence now that EPC ratings are impacting the price of properties. Government have had a go at modelling this for a while now, but I think the cost of living crisis has definitely exacerbated this now. Tenants and those are looking for starter homes, they're going to the EPC first. Let's talk. We could talk about the EPC and whether it's any good or not. That's a different topic altogether, right? But it's an indicator of energy bills, and they are wanting properties with an energy price with energy prices that are low.
Yeah.
And I think it's not the most recent stat I saw, Knight Frank said that there's a 2% uplift for every EPC grade you go up. And for bigger house, that is enormous.
Yeah.
That makes the cost benefit economic payback calculation, just you can ignore that now, because the energy price, the price of your property will go up way beyond the cost of doing the retrofit work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's quite a big deal. But overall, what do we need? This national plan in place is critical, because there are so many component parts that make every house renovatable, and the supply chain willing and able and trained to do that renovation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the point of the National Retrofit Hub. There were some working groups that have been set up to sort of delve into some of the bits and pieces of how that will work. But really, as I'll read them out in a minute, but the really important bits is actually the arteries that link all those working groups, because the last thing we want to do is sit in another silo, talk about standards as the first one, and it not be completely interlinked with with the people that are developing the training market, because they need to know what we're aiming for, what's the long-term aim for the building, so that we know what to train people on. So the first working group, which is next week, will be on, it was initially titled Performance Standards, but it's actually being renamed as Warm, Comfortable, Net Zero Readiness, which sounds a bit clunky, but actually if we focus on energy, we're going to ignore fuel poverty, comfort, health, particularly for people that can't afford to do this. We need to do something to keep them healthy. And then the second working group is technology and techniques. That's really bringing the manufacturers on board with all this so that they're on the same page. Then workforce growth and skills development, areas to understand sort of skills accreditation, competencies, and curriculum reform. When I sat on the government's Green Jobs Task Force in 2021, no outcomes really to shout about. It was just, oh, yeah, we need green jobs. Brilliant. Let's write a report. No outcomes that were meant that David could go away and start really concentrating on things that he wasn't already doing. You know, he's doing all the right things, but every job is a green job really in the future. Mm-hmm. So how do we improve the way that people are doing their day-to-day job right now? And no matter what the job they're doing, they need to transform that, as well as having training courses out there that bring a new workforce to bear on the market. Another work group is finance. There's a lot of good work happening already in that space. So the National Retrofit Hub is not looking to take over any of this, by the way. It's looking to just try and fill the gaps in things that are happening. So it's bringing people together that are doing good stuff, particularly in finance. And we saw only this week that nationwide, haven't they? They've launched their 0% additional loan to an existing mortgage. We'll see what the take up of that is. And then the final two working groups are delivery approaches. So because most of this is about local authorities wanting to do more, but not knowing how, because it's so complex. Where do they start? Hopefully we can come up with some ways to procure and deliver retrofit at scale that they can just pick up and go with. And then there's creating the market, incentives, public awareness campaigns, long-term policy drivers, planning. I'm sure all of your friends on the call today will be wrestling with planners on a daily basis. And that's a big blocker for when it comes to retrofit, particularly in conservation areas. So those are those areas. My job is to try and make sure that we've got all the right conversations happening, and critically that the arteries between those working groups are live, because I think we'll be ending up with a model that enables anybody in any position trying to do more retrofit to just plug into the latest knowledge, the latest training course, the latest bit of finance that might need next. It's easily reachable so that they aren't having to go all over the country and speak to different people talking about their own particular bone of contention before they get to the answer they need. It's not difficult. In that sense, we now describe it, but actually it'd be super, super difficult to, over the next year, to try and make sure we've got everything mapped. That's the first job. Yeah. What's everybody actually up to? So somebody in Northumberland who's got a problem, they know it's already happening in Cornwall, just give them a call. And that's one of our difficult things. But if I were in government and you said to me, what would you do first? I'd give every house that plan. So we need a national plan, but if every house knew all the list of things that are the most appropriate for that house, least cost mix of measures that need to be done to get to net zero, or rather, I should stop using net zero, absolute zero carbon emissions for that house. Then an architect that's been called up, or a builder that's been called up, or anybody that they could just pick that plan up, say, right, I need to design my house around these principles. That's done.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that kitchen's going to be fitted. I know that the insulation needs to go underneath those units or on that wall, or the bathroom's going. You can't do that work. Nobody's going to be lifting that lovely oak floor just to put the insulation in when it's just been finished. It's that kind of things. The visibility. It's the threads that bring us all together that I think we need in place super soon.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as a homeowner, and I've just installed a kitchen without any insulation, underneath. I mean, it's just if your builder doesn't know, and bearing in mind I work for, as I've said before, people on the call know I'm no sustainability expert, so I'm representing the masses who are learning on the way. So where do we go to get this information? With that plan for me sounds like an ideal starting point, because even the EPC doesn't allow you to, it gives you guides, but there's no ready reckoner of what's involved. And then just you touched on nationwide. I think that's interesting to see how to pick up on that, but what are other people going to be doing? Because that was one loan to existing mortgage borrowers for a certain amount of money. I'm now hoping that that's going to be the opening of the floodgates when it comes to people, a bit like your Cozy Homes initiative or in Oxfordshire, whereby they are going off on their own accord to undertake these works. But if they know that they could actually undertake those works and it's zero cost on a finance perspective, then more of that's going to happen. David, in terms of, Russell's just mentioned about how this government seems to be allergic to any regulation and sort of their ethos there. I understand you've been speaking with the Labour Party. What's coming down the line? What are they proposing? Anything that's going to hasten this pace of change?
Yes. Albeit before I talk about them, I think it's fair to say that this government, the last government, this sort of slightly crazy government with 3 prime ministers we've had in 4 years, have actually done some relatively sensible things and have made some relatively long-term financial commitments. Certainly when you compare that to what we had under the coalition government, the Cameron government was a complete disaster. So let's just clarify what they are before we move on to what's next. So the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund is a partnership effectively between government and housing associations to start tackle the worst property in their stock. But the most recent wave of that funding, I think, totals around 1.5 billion in 2 years. And that includes the match from the housing associations. And it's going to fund some relatively good retrofit projects. Not perfect, but relatively good. Going to be, in terms of core principles, what we want to be seeing: a fabric first, it's whole house retrofit. It's not just funding individual measures. It's doing creating the plans and carrying out the assessments and getting design done and all those sorts of things, which might sound like common sense to everyone on this call, but isn't what we were doing last decade at all. So that's relatively encouraging. There's then a big program called the Home Upgrade Grant, which is primarily to tackle off-gas grid property around the country, and that is also whole house. So they're spending the plan is that they'll spend somewhere between £30,000 and £40,000 per property. You can do some half decent, some good retrofit for that sort of money. And their commitment to those programs is fairly enduring. So it was in the last Tory manifesto that they'd, I think, invest, I forget the numbers now, so about 4 billion into the social housing sector. They've now extended that to 6 billion, but of course they've extended the timescale. So they've made it 10 years rather than this parliament, but it is starting to come through. And that is definitely a sector I'd encourage architects to start looking at, because there is, as soon as we start to get into delivery of these projects, they've immediately run into a skills gap around designers. Immediately. We haven't got on to trades yet, but they've got their heads stuck in the sand a bit about that. Design, there's the big opportunities there to work with some very good clients broadly. So definitely something we could talk about how people might do that if there's interest in doing it. In terms of what might be coming next, I mean, it looks at the minute it looks like a red tinged government, if not a red government, from next year. And I only know what was presented yesterday at the National Housing Federation conference by Alan Whitehead, who's effectively the shadow minister for retrofit, sits under David Miliband. Sorry, that's a sin, isn't it? Ed Miliband. And that was they were talking about I think a £10 billion a year program for the next 10 years. So they want to get away from the sort of, individual schemes that run for a year or two and then disappear. And that's very welcome. That will take away a lot of the uncertainty, a lot of the excuses, frankly, that we have around companies and businesses not investing in the sector because they're not convinced of the longevity of it. And when you have market failure, call me an old-fashioned lefty, but that's what government should do. They should be providing that bridging funding infrastructure until a market can establish itself and work, which you can't at the minute because we've got big market failure in retrofit. It's too expensive and there's no labour force. So governments do need to intervene when there's a strategically vital mission to like delivering net zero, just as there was in a man on the moon or whatever challenge you want to look at. So that seemed to be a very good. I think he's very heavily influenced by some very good people. One of them might be on this call, not sure. It works across tenures. It's Achilles' heel maybe that I think he recognised this, that they want local authorities to lead that. The local authorities at the moment are terribly under-resourced and have effectively no leadership or management or experience of retrofit. There's one or two individuals, but by and large they lack the skills to be really good commissioners and clients. And if you're going to make it as central to what they do as running social services and all the other vital things that they do, then you have to address that challenge. But in fairness, he recognised that in his presentation too. So I was quite encouraged. But this is manifesto speak, not doing.
Yeah, the actuality. Just talk. Alex asked the question actually. Alex, did you want to come off mute because it seems pertinent to ask your question now to David?
Yeah, I was just asking about. I've worked in kind of design and building and project management for years and years, and I've been working for the last few years as a passive house consultant, and I've done the AECB's retrofit course. I'm currently doing the retrofit coordinator course, and so normally I do the whole thing. I'm a one-man band. I would assess properties. I write reports for it. I do a PHPP model, so I would design what needs doing, specify things.
Yeah.
Obviously, I can't do all that under PAS 2035. I'm not a chartered architect, so I can't be the designer. Even though I've been asked to be the designer by someone who's trying to get some work for Kent Council. I can't be the assessor because I'm not an energy assessor, and I have no interest in being an energy assessor. I look at a lot of properties that have been assessed by energy assessors very badly. So the last thing I want to do is that role. So is there going to be an easier way for people to get into those roles other than jump through the current hoops? And as an example, there must be lots of people who want to assess projects, and there might be an architect, but they would have to go and train as an energy assessor to assess it.
No, that bit isn't actually. That was changed. That was the case in the first PAS, the first time it was published, but that was a loophole that was taken out. There was you are, as a qualified architect, perfectly capable and able to do the assessment without training. It's absolutely ridiculous to train an architect as an energy assessor. So that bit is changed some time ago, but I don't think the bit about you. We don't know each other, Alex, but as a passive house consultant, you presumably have a lot of knowledge. But if you're not a qualified chartered architect, surveyor, or construction manager, the PAS does say you can't do the design. Apart from, and you're stretching me here a little bit, if you're a qualified retrofit coordinator, which you say you're working towards, you can certainly do some of the design work. I'm not sure if it's still
currently. I thought
A and B.
you could do up to B, but that's changing to only A.
Well, they're getting rid of the risk pathways altogether. So I don't know what they'll set on the next draft.
So all the projects I would do would be deep retrofit projects. So they'd all be high risk projects anyway. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what you're talking far too much common sense here. These sort of career paths, it all needs to be worked out, and there needs to be a consensus built around who can and can't do it. It's some practical solutions to all that stuff. And the PAS and its committee, which I'm not part of, by the way, but you know, they're a group of well-intentioned people who aren't always necessarily involved in the coalface and don't, you know, always know the realities of things. I suspect that will all get solved in time, but I do understand your frustration. Right now. Example, there's someone who's contacted me who needs a designer for the work they're doing, and he can't find one for love or money for doing a project for Kent Council. So
there's skills gaps everywhere. What can I say? We've trained 5,000 people in the last 4 years, which we're quite proud of. It's, to put that in some context, it's about a 200th of what we need.
Well, yeah. On when it comes to, so then presumably we have a skills gap, but the current how can I say, so the current marketplace, are they heads down working as much as they can? Are they being utilized as well? I mean, is there a demand for there's obviously is, if there's a skills gap, there's a current demand that is just not being serviced, but I'm just hoping the current you know, the amount of skills that we do have and the roles are being utilized fully at this moment in time.
Well, I think that's one of the problems, David, isn't it? I mean, I think you've quoted, I think, recently some conversion factors from people that get the qualifications to whether they can get out there. That's quite an interesting challenge at the moment, isn't
it? It is. Yeah. There's about half the people, let's just focus on retrofit coordinators, about half the people that qualify go on and become Trustmark accredited, which is where they're an official retrofit coordinator. They need the qualification, then they need to get accredited. And yeah, we tried to understand why so few of them, why such a large proportion don't. And I think it's probably because they haven't seen the sector that they want to work in yet, because if they're, you know, the history of energy efficiency is bloody awful. It's not somewhere that I wouldn't encourage my kids to go and work in, what that was. What we need to make it into, absolutely I would do. So it's, you know, are there good employers, are there good projects, is there longevity of career, good career prospects, all of these sorts of things, all of which is part of what we're trying to help with, but it's all still form and with the best will in the world. That's why I really want what Russell's doing around the Retrofit Hub and other initiatives to succeed is we need consensus around this stuff. It's all very well and good us saying, oh, we think it should work like this. This is what a career pathway should look like. Yeah. We could come up with something brilliant, but there needs to be consensus around it.
Yeah. I think one point perhaps to make, because the audience we've got today is predominantly architects, is that there's a world of difference between the sort of the retrofit programs that exist right now and the way architects think about renovation. Completely different market. It's very rare there's a crossover. So the sort of work that would end up being within a sort of a grant-funded world, or the SHDF, dare I say it, it's on the basis of who does design, really. So if you're looking at a sort of a single measure retrofit program, the best way to run those programs is to get a contractor that is also the designer. So external wall insulation, for instance, you've got contractors that design their own work. They've got professional indemnity insurance. The manufacturer is signing off the warranties. It's all completely dealt with. A householder generally is technically led. They've been sold kit. They've been sold a brand. They want stuff. But a householder that might want an extension, they would naturally go to an architect. Sometimes they go to a builder who will try to avoid an architect to try and do it all their own way, and they've got a mate who's a building control officer and get it done that way. Those worlds very rarely cross over. I'm sorry, Samantha, but you're going to have to agree to disagree.
Can I ask a question?
I haven't quite finished.
Okay.
When things start to cross over is when you've got several measures, and this is where David mentioned risk paths within PAS 2035. When you might have 3 or 4 measures where you've got individual contractors that are designing their own work, that's when it starts to get messy and where the retrofit coordinator expertise really comes in, and the retrofit designer needs to come in. So you've got external wall insulation, underfloor insulation, internal wall insulation, windows. None of those people that design their own work care about how they fit with everything else. So you need somebody, a coordinator, to make sure they're talking to each other and coordinate with the designer that will design those interfaces and put those details in place and make sure the risks are managed and make sure things are done in the right order so that things aren't falling by the wayside. But my experience, Samantha, is that architects don't want to go anywhere near those jobs because there's not enough money in it. And I've tried. Now, you might be an exception to the rule, but I'd love to hear your version of how you work. She's not going to talk, is she?
I'm assuming when Samantha was the person that wanted to ask the question.
No, it was me, Lyra. Hi. Interesting point of view, because maybe it depends on the budget on the project and the value of the building in the first place, because I think that there's a big difference there. So for instance, where I work, we deal with very large properties and clients have much bigger budgets. And we take a completely holistic view. And we do all of that stuff like Samantha is saying. So perhaps that's where the difference is. It's where the, lies in the budget.
Well, clearly, but that's like 0.2% of the market. If we're going to try and drive retrofit, we need to be doing it on a phrase I use, a mass customization basis. We need to be getting to the point where those details are in a library that we can draw down on and a retrofit coordinator can just plug into them. So if we're talking about the future of how our profession, your profession, our profession collectively moves towards mass customization retrofit of 26.5 million homes, it ain't going to be in that market with people with very big budgets. It's going to be a project.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. And I have architect friends who work with smaller budgets. And the challenge that they say they come up against, it's not that they don't want to do it, it's that the money isn't there on the client side. And I'll be honest, often this stuff isn't sexy, is it? Generally, people want a brand new kitchen and they spend a lot on their kitchen.
Yeah.
And maybe don't want to spend so much on insulation because you can't see that stuff. And it's just, for the general public, it's not perceived as being as interesting, and they can't show their friends around their new insulation. Maybe I'm being slightly harsh there.
No,
but
sorry, can I come in?
Yeah.
On that point, because I think that's a very, very good point. You're not being harsh at all. That's exactly where we've been for a long time, because of Hono perspective. But I would say I think that is beginning to change. The number of people, because they know, they used to look at me when they said, what do you do? Oh, from the Retrofit Academy. What the hell's that? And even when you explain it to them, you just see their eyes glaze over. They don't want to. The last 2 years, and particularly the rising energy bills, has changed that perception. No, it might just based on my very small sample size of people who talk to me whilst I'm stood watching my son play cricket. They are suddenly very interested. Now, whether they're interested for what we might consider the right reasons, tackling climate change or eradicating fuel poverty or any of those things, or just to save them money, it doesn't really matter. But I think that perception is changing. Never going to ever be particularly sexy, but it might be quite cool to live in an energy efficient house soon. I think, irrespective of whether you can see it or not.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
think
the
it needs to be
Tesla
really
effect.
driven by legislation, doesn't it? Legislation needs to be driving this so that it's not a choice.
That's one way of doing it. It's
think-
not going to happen with this government. But
No,
yeah.
not this government, I agree. But sorry, can I just summarize? I am certain that myself as an architect, most of the architects I know, they want to do this work. So it's not a lack of desire from the architect side.
Yeah, I'd quite like to, second that, because we are trying our best here. We're retrofit coordinators and architects, and we try to do everything in-house, and we do try to offer a service to customers that don't have lots of money actually, and we're trying our best to kind of cover that market as well in a simple way as we can in-house. So we are actually, it is actually filtering through, and I think as people realise that, yes, you know, I think people are realising, and people are coming to me and saying, you know, oh, how am I going to get my bills down, and what can I do? What's the most cost-effective way of making my house energy efficient? And they're not all in big spending brackets at all, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So I think that is coming through now, and we are trying to cover that market. And I know lots of other architects in where we are living here are going down the same route.
A lot of this is just about awareness of the benefits of this actually happening. One thing that we're doing apparently very shortly to launch a national model. We've got an energy model for every house in the UK now, which means it'll be a free-to-use tool. People can log on to their own property and see what it would take, what measures we required to get to zero carbon for free. And it's not based on a survey, so it's going to be some errors, but people can correct the assumptions that have been made about their property. It recalculates live, and it gets pretty accurate. But it's enough information for them to say, I need to speak to someone else, and that's the key part. And it gets rid of. I can say this because I've been running retrofit programs, area-based retrofit programs for a while. It gets rid of time wasters, because I'm sure all of you on the call here have probably been on the phone to somebody that thinks they're an expert on this stuff for an hour, and you get to the project and you realise they haven't actually got any money. They just wanted to bend your ear and tell you how wonderful they are. There's loads of that. But having that kind of approach where somebody knows it's going to cost 70k to get to zero carbon, or 10k to get to zero carbon, you know, that's good information. They know whether it's worthwhile going to the next stage. Those are the kinds of things that are going to get builders more excited as well. The builder might do that before they speak to the homeowner, so that they're a bit more informed about the things that are useful. The builder that I'm working with today, we were talking about insulation, that's internal wall insulation that we could put in. We found something difficult in the building. We're going to have to change the design. I can do that on the fly. But he wasn't aware that different manufacturers have different thermal conductivities within their products. He's always just saying, oh, it's 50 mil, I can't get anything. So they're swapping out, on previous customers, they've been swapping out materials, probably even get to the point where it doesn't meet the building regs, because they've just picked something cheap for the same depth, doesn't do the same thing. This is absolute basics, and the building industry doesn't know this stuff. So we start to get some of that in there, to start to value the professional that's going to give them advice, and the money starts coming in for our market to be paid to do the job that we're able to do. So there's all these bits that overlap with each other, and quite a lot of it's about awareness. And one of the reasons we have this working group on customer incentives and trying to build the market is we need that national awareness campaign that probably even starts at school, right? There's so many intertwining bits. Sorry, David.
I find the biggest problem in this area is actually the skills of the people, the contractor skills, to be honest, and being able to install everything properly, and also not giving the client sort of misinformation about correct levels for the correct installation to use, that sort of thing, in the correct instance. They're constantly saying, you know, why don't you use this? It's much cheaper. I've used it on this, that, and the other, and it's worked fine there. And you're thinking, well, no, it probably doesn't actually. So, but it's getting that is our biggest problem in this area, is getting the right skills to do the job on site properly. It's a big problem. Yeah.
It's reaching them, though, David, though, isn't it? How do you reach those builders? They were trained 25 years ago by their dad, and we need to get that information in their head.
Got a magic bullet on that, to be honest. I don't know. I think it's incredibly hard to try and get a leopard to change its spots, particularly where I know we have one of the proudest moments of my career is where we managed to get a really well-established, successful effort member of the Federation of Master Builders to do exactly that. I was really, really proud of it. And it's been the best thing that's ever happened to his business, because you've got a virgin market to go at that was desperate for organizations with the skills and knowledge that they suddenly realized they got. They never understood it before. They knew about the issues before, around moisture risk or what have you, but penny drop moments, and it works. But I think they're exceptions, not the rules. I think by and large, going back to Samantha's point, you're probably looking at the next generation of builders and capture. I completely agree. I know you weren't talking about skills specifically when you're talking about schools and colleges. We need people coming into the industry with the right mindset.
Yeah.
And it's much easier, I think, to work with that next generation or the newest generation. Government focuses a lot on, for example, turning a gas engineer into a heat pump engineer. I mean, you can have relatively few successes with that, I fear. A new approach needed.
There is a question here from David, where it's a comment really regarding landlords, and again, I suppose regardless of the sentiment behind the question, it's like, where can a homeowner go to? It'd be quite handy for you to post your link, Russell, as you just mentioned, because that's a starting point. But for landlords, and many private landlords are gonna, if there's a problem with houses, they tend to act quicker than a social landlord anyway. I mean, you're going to get a much quicker turnaround in general from a private landlord than you would from someone providing social housing. But where do landlords go to instigate these changes that we're talking about that are required in the first instance? And again, that comes back down, and yes, they need to be incentivized, and this national campaign you've mentioned is required, because change of behavior is paramount to all of this. Samantha's point in terms of, the architects are doing a job, but it's a portion of job. Many people won't even consider going to an architect. So it's like, we need this plan in place as well that's made available, so people can just have a ready reckoner of what's required, and your service in different segments of the homeowner market. So I think that plan is absolutely key to help people to know where to go. So where would landlords go in order to undertake this work? I don't think they're cynical people necessarily, but obviously there is a cost to doing some of this stuff. Yeah, well, the minimum energy efficiency standard is now in place. So landlords, I can't remember I've not looked at this recently, but it's now, I think it's EF and G properties cannot be rented out legally. If you're living in an EF or G property, it shouldn't be rented out right now. Has that actually come into place though? But even if I believe so. From yesterday, right? Yeah, I believe so. It might be, and it will be ratcheting up. And rumor has it that's going to be introduced into owner-occupied properties as well. Certainly, Labour will do that. So it's a case of bringing the bottom up. But there's nothing there to get people to aspire to do this right now. Lots of things mooted. In particular, one good thing is a sort of stamp duty rebate scheme. So you get quite a lot of your stamp duty payments back if you were to get up to a B or something like that on your EPC scale, which for a property like mine, which is quite old, is actually pretty much impossible. Yeah. So they've got to be flexible in some way to have it. It's nice to have incentives. It'd be good to bring the bottom up. All those in combination are critically important. Finance to enable contractors to grow their business and pay for training, because it can't always be about grants. It's got to be part of a business model. It's long-term view, directing people to what's coming, telling people that have got money they are going to get a grant, I think, is as good as anything else, because they won't wait for that money to come. They won't sit on their hands and do nothing. Just having a long-term view about plan. When are things going to get launched? Incentivizing the people that need the help the most earliest, I think, is what we just don't do it.
Just on that private rented sector point. I mean, that I would highlight that there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity going on at the minute. From some, there's some seriously impressive people coming into the sector, and they're coming into it to make money, which is their right. And I don't know, one of them who's setting up a one-stop shop, if you like, similar to some of the stuff that Russell's set up, but focused on that area, and primarily focused on London. And whether that will work or not remains to be seen. But now their anxiety, the people running that, is, well, can we find the people, the designers, the coordinators, the assessors, who can do that job at really high quality and to a similar standard? So they're really keen to meet people. I assume, I don't know many of the people on the call, but that's what their main anxiety is. It's not. We always used to say, Russ, that there's no demand, or used to hear all the time, there's no demand for retrofit. I don't hear that anymore. There's loads of demand for retrofit. There's just not the developed service models to service that demand, with a few minor exceptions. Well, sorry, notable exceptions, not minor.
I'm assuming was that Becky you're talking about, and Fern?
No, that's Becky Thurb now. You're talking about there that's more focused on the able to pay homeowner market. No, that I don't even know if they've officially launched it yet. That's I think it's called Hestia.
That's it, Anna. Yeah.
But they're joining the dots, and they're I mean, again, that's sort of part of it's an alternative to the plan, isn't it? It's sort of they're providing that service there. This actually flown by this hour. Thank you very much, you guys. It's nice to have contributions from the floor as well, so very much appreciate that. And yeah, I don't know what I feel really in terms of there's clearly so much to do, but without you guys, we wouldn't be, driving this forward. Where would we be? So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us, and continue the good work. And I hope from a national retrofit hub that all of your pillars, just working with people to deliver on that, because we can't rely on the government by the sound. We can't wait for the next election, even if you want to wait for it.
Quite.
You guys are doing it now, and appreciate the work that you're doing. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for everyone else's input on the call, and hopefully we'll hear from you guys again, and Russell will pick up regarding the other conversation as well, because that all leads into one. So yeah, if you liked the webinar, you've enjoyed it, spread the word, get more people from the Artex offices who don't have a sustainability function within them, because we want to be talking to them. We don't want to be constantly talking to people who already think like us. So spread the word. But yeah, thanks guys, enjoy your afternoons, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.
See you later.
Cheers.
Great to see you all. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.